Good morning, everybody. See, everybody is still with us, more or less. Hopefully, you got a good night of restful sleep. Not that anything was going on in the world. Today is a monumental day for you, and I just want to start by saying you're welcome for this. The day that you learn the rule against perpetuities in law school is a day that all law students and practicing lawyers remember fondly and as a rite of passage that is just part of the law school process. So, what people understand about the rule against perpetuities, I'm really not sure. But what the rule of perpetuities really is, okay, is the thing that you bring up when you want to say something that is obscure and indecipherable and complain about law school. Okay, so I am giving that to you today. This you will be sort of admitted into the club of law students and lawyers who have worked through the rule against perpetuities. We're going to get to it in a little while, but before we do, I want to actually, I'll just hold the rest of that speech for when we actually get to the rule against perpetuities. But you are very welcome. It is really my pleasure to gift this to you, and I hope that you will accept this delivery. Okay. So before we get into that, I do want to open up the floor a little bit for questions on the future interests that we have covered already, the various flavors of remainder, in particular the contingent remainder and the two vested remainders that are subject to something, right? The subject to divestment or subject to open. So y'all have sat with those for almost 48 hours now, and I'm just curious, are there questions? Or I'm not curious, I know there's questions, but I'm opening the floor for questions on those before we get into rule against perpetuities coverage. Everybody's got them down. Hunter's got a question. Good.
Okay, so just
I know everybody doesn't have them down. So
just for my clarification,
yeah.
You said that if there is a vested remainder, then there cannot be a contingent remainder, correct? It would be an executory interest.
That's right.
Okay.
So, there's like a little voice in my head whenever I get a question, and y'all probably have observed this voice speaking to me while I am trying to teach. And it's saying, but there's this kind of weird situation in which the general statement that you just made is not exactly true. And so if they take it literally to be true, then it's going to cause problems. So there is a voice in my brain telling me that there might be some situation in which they can exist within the same conveyance, but they will not exist at the same sort of generation of conveyance. Okay, so I'm saying that, and I'm hoping that it's not confusing y'all, but I feel like it's my responsibility to say, like, it's not the case that you will never ever see a conveyance that has both of these things, but it is the case that you will never ever see a conveyance that has both of these things attached to the same life estate. Okay, so if it says to A for life, then to B if blah, 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 and it's a contingent remainder, you're not going to see any vesting remainders attached to that A's life estate. So what you said, Hunter, is correct as far as it goes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And the other part of what Hunter said is also true, which is that when you see a vested remainder subject to something, the other future interests that you're going to run into are going to be executory interests. Okay, so think of those as groups, right? There's contingent remainder, contingent remainder, contingent remainder, and then there's vested remainder subject to something, and then a bunch of executory interests. Okay, so that is a pretty good rule of thumb for you to follow. What else? Okay, we'll have more examples to work through as well. Jack, you got a question?
You just answered it right there. I was just going to ask if we were going to have some examples. That's all.
Yeah, we will, but I want to get through a little bit of material and then we'll come back to example. I can imagine even setting aside another class day just to do conveyance examples. Also, I would encourage you, and I know some of you have done this, do the conveyances that are on the old exams. Those are your best indication of what's going to be on the exam, because that's what's been on the exam previously. And send me your answers, and and we can sort of find holes, or send me your questions or your answers. If there's a particular one that you keep tripping over, let's set up a time to talk about it, or we can converse via email about it as well. Okay. So I am going to pull up the PowerPoint again. Let's see if I'm on the right page. Sort of. Okay. So here is the PowerPoint, and this is the chart that we talked about on Monday. And I didn't talk about the other kind of future interest that is worth sort of having an extended discussion about. Remember up here, we talked about that, we're only really worried about remainders and executory interest, that these three are pretty straightforward and there's not a lot of special rules for them. They just are what they are. Remainder is the one that has all of the different flavors. Executory interest, I do want to spend just a tiny bit of time talking about as well. Okay, and so there's our remainder thing. And so let's talk about executory interest. So what are the things that I think would help you sort of be able to capture knowledge about executory interest? I think the first thing is to identify when you're going to see them, okay? Because you're only going to see them in two types of situations. And one type I think is really, really easy. The type that I think is really, really easy is the type that we've already talked about, where with executory, we've actually talked about both, but we've talked about in some level of detail, which is an executory interest that simply follows a fee simple subject to an executory limitation. So this is in a lot of ways just a future interest held by some other party, a third party grantee, that looks just like a possibility of a reverter. Okay, it pretty much functions exactly like a possibility of reverter. Okay, so this example here in the A portion, to A so long as it is used for school purposes, but if it is not used for school purposes, then to B, that's a pretty straightforward defeasible fee. It's a fee simple subject to an executory limitation for A, and the future interest here we label as an executory interest in fee simple. Now, some of you might have come across in the book and also in supplements and or online the term shifting and springing executory interest. Those are labels, but they don't actually mean anything, right? They don't function any differently. So for example, this is a shifting executory interest because it will divest, well, let me just forget it, right? You don't need to know the difference between shifting and springing executory interest. If you want to know the difference, then let's talk about it after class. I don't want to confuse everybody for something that doesn't mean anything in this course, and quite frankly, doesn't mean anything in the world either. So don't worry about trying to distinguish between shifting and springing executory interests. So the first example is when it's just after a fee simple subject to an executory limitation. Hopefully, we're all pretty good with that kind of executory interest. The only other place where you're going to see an executory interest is after a vested remainder subject to something. Because if it's an indefeasibly vested remainder, then we're good. We've got nothing else. We can just stop right there. But if it's a vested remainder subject to divestment, or if it's a vested remainder subject to open, you're going to see some executory interests out there. Okay, that is where you find, that is the second place in which you find executory interest. And again, this goes to sort of Hunter's comment earlier. After the vested remainder subject twos, that's when you see executory interest. So if you look at these two examples, 2A for life. Hold on. 2A for life, then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C. Okay, here A has a life estate. Hopefully that's not tripping anybody up. That's pretty straightforward. Then this is a little harder, right? Then to B, but if B smokes a cigar during A's life, then to C, right? The then to B is a vested remainder, but then this language is making that vested remainder subject to divestment because it could be forfeited if B smokes a cigar during A's life. So B has vested remainder subject to divestment in fee simple. And C, this sort of extra person out there, is the one who is going to potentially jump in and divest B of their interest. Okay, and so that is an executory interest that they will sort of jump in. And if in fact the B character here does smoke a cigar during A's life, then what happens? Can somebody tell me what happens to the interest? A is still alive, B smokes a cigar. What are the interests at that point? JC, you want to be the attempter here?
Go for it. So A still has a life state, he's still alive, and then C has fee simple.
So A has a life estate, and you said C has fee
Yes,
simple.
remainder in fee simple.
Remainder in fee simple, but what kind of remainder?
Vested remainder in fee simple.
What kind of vested
Oh,
remainder?
indefeasibly vested remainder in fee simple.
Great, perfect. Okay, so that honestly is the best possible answer I could have gotten because it reminds us of several things to keep in mind. Remember, JC's first example was life. First answer was A has a life estate, C has a fee simple. Can't be, right? Can't be. That's a mistake that is common. It can't be because that means two people have the possessory interest, two different versions of a possessory interest. That can't be. Okay. Then he caught himself and he said, oh, no. If it's a life estate, we got to have one of these. So it must be a remainder. And he said remainder in fee simple. And that was correct. But then I said, well, what kind of remainder in fee simple? And so then we got to go to our future interest chart and say, okay, he said it's a vested remainder in fee simple. I said, perfect. It's a vested remainder in fee simple. And then we've got three of these. And then we finally got to, it's an indefeasibly vested remainder in fee simple. By the time we get to that point where B has smoked a cigar, we know for sure that B is out and that C is in, and that when this life estate is over, C is going to take it in the form of JC what?
Indefeasibly, in fee simple when he dies.
In fee simple,
Yeah.
right? Once C takes it as fee simple. When I say takes it, I mean after A dies and C takes possession of the property. Okay, not when C has its interest. They have an interest all along. Okay, good. So that is an example that begins with an executory interest, and then we sort of played it all the way out. Similarly, if we have vested remainders subject to open, we also are going to find executory interest. So that's this example down here. 2A for life, then to A's children who reached 21 during A's life. And then we get these facts. At the time of conveyance, A has two children, one who has already reached 21 and one who has not. Okay, so for the one who has X satisfied this condition, A, of course, has a life estate. X has a vested remainder subject to open in fee simple, subject to open because there are more people that could possibly jump into that group. Okay, could possibly jump into that group. And the people who could possibly jump into that group, here we'll just use Y, although it's any child of A. Okay, any child of A under 21. Any of those individuals, in this example, Y, have executory interests in fee simple. They will jump in to the group of vested remainders. So JC, let me ask you this. What happens if A is still alive, if Y turns 21? Then what are the interests at that time?
Yeah, A has life estate.
A has
X
a
has
life.
best. Yeah, X has vested remainder subject to open and fee simple, and then Y has a vested remainder subject to open and fee simple.
Great. So you note that in both of these examples, the executory interest, when it jumps in, now it's back up right behind the life estate, and so it's a remainder again. Okay, so here the executory interest became an indefeasibly vested remainder. Here the executory interest is becoming a vested remainder subject to open. Okay, subject to open because it's still plausible that A has more kids that will turn 21 during A's life. Okay, these are the only situations where you're going to see an executory interest. Okay, following a fee simple subject to an executory limitation, the more straightforward version, or following vested remainders subject to whatever, subject to divestment or subject to open. Okay. Note that what executory interests do is divest. They divest preceding interests. So in both of these examples, what we've seen happen is the executory interest, when something happens, jump in and kick out or shrink, in the example of a subject to open, the interest that is preceding it, the sort of immediately preceding interest. So here, when it stops being used for school purposes, the B's interest divests A's interest. It kicks it out. It makes it go away. Here, when B smokes a cigar, C's interest divests B's interests, makes it go away. Here, when Y reaches 21, Y's interest partially divests, shrinks X's interest. Okay? Executory interests act aggressively to divest preceding interests. They always have that character. And so a lot of people say they are aggressive because they don't wait patiently like a remainder for a life to end. They act aggressively to divest, to execute the preceding interest. Okay. Note, however, and this cuts back to the dialogue with JC, that in this example, when they divest, B's interest becomes possessory. It becomes a present interest. So JC, let me ask you, if it stops being used for school purposes, what is the state of title in this example up here at top, number A?
B has fee simple.
B has fee simple. That's possessory, right? So when they divest A, they actually not just take A's stick, they actually can now come onto the property without being a trespasser. But down here, right, when C divests B, or when Y partially divests X, in both of these examples, does JC, C, or Y in the two examples, can they come onto the property yet?
No, they still have a future interest.
They still have future interests, okay? So note that when it divests, it doesn't necessarily become possessory. In this example, it does, but all it does is divest the future interest or the preceding interest, not necessarily mean I can now take over the property, okay? In these two examples, we have a life estate and the remainders are going to do what remainders do, which is, even though there might be a lot of like action in the remainder space, they're still going to wait patiently for the life estate to terminate before they can become possessory. Okay. All right. I'm going to pause here. Questions on executory interests? It's so easy when it's being explained. It's so hard when you're out there in the middle of the pool by yourself. We good? All right. So let's skip that for now. Rule against perpetuities. Okay. Here are a couple of conveyances. To A, so long as used for school purposes, and if not used for school purposes, then to B. Okay, we've actually just had this example. So looking for a volunteer for both of these to just identify the interests. I think that these are not conveyances that are terribly difficult, shouldn't be terribly difficult. I just want to identify the interests here. So I'm looking for blue hands. Jasky, there you go. All right. So let's go with the top one. To A, so long as used for school purposes, and if not used for school purposes, then to B. What are the interests there?
Okay. So hold on, let me pull out my little chart. Got to remember all of these now. So A has a. I am totally blanking. Hold on. Okay, so A has a. I don't know why I'm blanking on this. Yeah, I'm totally blanking.
Okay.
Hold on.
No problem. You raised your hand. I didn't even call on you.
I know, and then I lost it. So
All right, let's go with Hunter. What do you got?
So I think A would have a fee simple subject to executory limitation.
Okay. And
then B would have an executory interest.
okay.
in fee
And
simple.
why do you think A has a fee simple subject to an executory limitation?
Because of the limitation that it has to be used for school purposes.
Okay, so that
And-
makes it a defeasible fee, one of the three. And how do you know that it's not, so long as maybe some people are thinking, oh, it's a fee simple determinable. How do you know it's not a fee simple determinable, but instead you're correct, it's a fee simple subject to an executory limitation?
Because it has a executory interest attached with it.
Yeah, the future interest is given away, right? The future interest is not kept by the grantor, it's given away to someone else, okay? So this is a fee simple subject to an executory limitation with an executory interest in fee simple. So let's do this one now. To A for life, then to B if the Grizzlies move from Memphis.
Still with me?
Yep,
I think then that would be fee simple subject to condition subsequent.
who?
Oh, sorry, to A.
Okay. So what makes you think that? Is it the part that says for life?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, never mind. I don't know the answer to this.
Let's try it. To A for life is what?
That's a life estate.
Yeah. Okay. So don't make it more hard than it has to be. It's a life estate. And if it's a life estate, then what has to follow the life estate? Either a reversion or a remainder. So what does B have?
B would have a remainder.
Remainder. So what flavor of remainder is this?
Let me go to the flavors. That would be I would say vested remainder subject to divestment.
Okay. So it isn't, but I see why you think it is. Jasky, you want to redeem yourself?
Sure. So is it the contingent remainder? Because
Yeah,
the
why?
Grizzlies, because if the Grizzlies don't move, then B doesn't have anything.
Correct. Okay, so there's something has to happen before before B has an interest. Okay, so we don't know, B's not ready to take it yet. Okay, because this condition is stuck onto it. So Hunter, the mistake you made is a very common mistake, and all those slides that I just skipped over, it said let's just skip that. That's meant to, I'm going to come back to them because that's what it's meant to correct, right? Seeing the difference between a contingent remainder and a vested remainder subject to divestment can be very difficult. Okay, it is, I think, actually the most difficult distinction to make. Okay, when you're looking at, so life estate should be easy, but what follows the life estate when it's maybe a contingent remainder or maybe a vested remainder subject to divestment, those are very hard. That's a very thin line between those two. And in fact, functionally, there's often not a difference. Okay, but this one, the way it's phrased, is a contingent remainder in fee simple, which means it is uncertain whether B is going to take it. And so my question with both of these, and we talked about this a little bit with the Marenholtz case, is what is the problem that exists with these particular conveyances? When might, and either of you guys, Jasky or Hunter, when might the things stop being used for school purposes?
Jasky, go ahead.
Wait, what? When might it stop being?
Yeah, right. So the condition here is as long as it's used for school purposes, it stays with A. But if it's not, then it goes to B. When could that happen? That might happen tomorrow. But
Right,
when else
it could
might?
happen anytime.
Anytime.
It could happen never.
What?
Yeah,
It could happen what?
anytime, or it could happen like never.
It could happen anytime or never. So that's like a pretty big range of time, right? It could be right now, or it could be never. And if it does happen, and it could be any time in between those two times, right? So could it be in 1,000 years?
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be in 1,000 years. Okay. What about the Grizzlies situation? When might the Grizzlies move from Memphis?
Now or never.
Now or never, or any point in between. Okay.
Yes.
So what these two are examples of are often classified as uncertain or unresolved future interests. Okay. They are uncertain, and they might be uncertain in perpetuity. Okay. So I often throw in things like if not used for school purposes during A's life, or if the Grizzlies move from Memphis during A's life or B's life or something like that. What I'm doing is cabining the time in which this could happen. It's not okay to create an interest that is uncertain in perpetuity, because forever this property here will be held with this uncertain future interest hanging over it. It will never get back to fee simple unless it stops being used for school purposes. If it gets stopped being used for school purposes in 250 years, what's going to happen is that we're going to have to find all the heirs of B, or we're going to have to keep B's estate open for that whole 250-year period in order to, because everybody's got, like, B's children and then grandchildren and great-grandchildren and then great-great-grandchildren and all that, or whomever the heirs of all those people are going to then, when it stops being used for school purposes, take over the property. That's bad, both because the property now is split 1,000 different ways. And so we've got a problem with a lot of concurrent owners, which we'll talk about next week. But it's also a problem because until that time, there's always this sort of sword hanging over this property that at any point it could switch in ownership. Okay. And so, because those are bad outcomes, what has developed are a series of rules that destroy uncertain or unresolved future interests like these. Okay. So there's something about these types of future interests that can remain open forever and therefore cause problems. And so there's a series of rules that have been developed in order to destroy them. Okay. Because they cause problems in terms of alienability, because it's hard to sell these things because of the uncertainty. And they potentially cause problems in terms of sort of dividing up property. So let's say B has 350 heirs at the point that it stops being used for school purposes. Well, then each of those heirs will hold 1/350th fee simple, which nobody wants to deal with. Okay, nobody wants to deal with that. So among the rules that have developed, and the most notorious and actually the most relevant for us of them, is the rule against perpetuities. Now, what we're about to do is walk through a series of steps that will help you, one, identify when the rule against perpetuities is applicable, and two, how to apply it. Okay? The most important thing that I want you to take out of this is those two things. When it might be applicable, and if you have to apply it, how. I don't want you to stay up all night trying to figure out precisely how to apply the rule against perpetuities. It would take too much time and too much attention for you. All I'm looking for is a general understanding of the purpose of why we have it, the situations where it might apply, and generally speaking, how you would apply it. Okay? So as I'm teaching this material, which I think is important to be introduced to in the first year course, both because it's a rite of passage, as I mentioned earlier, and because it is still relevant in preparation for the bar. And so the earlier you hear it, the better. While I think it is still relevant, I can tell you I'm not going to spend much more time beyond what we're about to spend on it, talking about the rule against perpetuities. There is not a lot of bang for your buck. Okay? It is going to apply infrequently. It's been reformed so that it's less important than it used to be. And people throw things into trusts now anyway. And so you don't run into the rule against perpetuities as much in real life as maybe you did 100 years ago. Okay? So Julie, you'll be happy we're in the modern times now. Okay. So what do we do? Here it is. Step one, identify the interests. We're doing that anyway, right? We've been identifying the interests this whole time. That's basically what we've been doing the last 3 weeks. Identify the interests. The only time that you're going to run into the rule against perpetuities is if you find either an executory interest or a contingent remainder. Those are the only interests that are subject to the rule against perpetuities. So if you do your conveyance and you don't find one of those things, then move on with your life. You do not have to continue to even think about the rule against perpetuities. But if you do run into an executory interest or a contingent remainder, then you should have a little bell go off that says, hey, I need to double check to make sure this doesn't violate the rule against perpetuities. Okay? So let's use this as our example. To A for life, then to A's first child to reach the age of 25. Okay? And so if I asked you to identify the interests here, let's hear from somebody else. What are the interests that are in this example? And hint, hint, if we're talking about the rule against perpetuities and it's only going to apply if there's executory interests and contingent remainders, I'll bet there's going to be some executory interests or contingent remainders in there. So that should narrow it down what you might find in this. So who wants to do it? Who's going to step in to our rule against perpetuities? Yeah, Tierney. Okay, great. Thank you. What do we got?
Okay, A has the life estate.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, 25. And so all 4 children have, they have, everybody has a contingent remainder in fee simple.
Great. And so you do have a contingent remainder. And so the bell is going off. Oh no, I have to at least think about the rule against perpetuities. Good. So hopefully everybody's seeing why this is a life estate and also why it is contingent remainders. Any of them might be the first child to reach the age of 25. Okay. But until someone does it, then it's contingent. Okay. It's not vested yet. Okay. So step 1 is identify the interests. We have done step 1 and we have found that there is a contingent remainder, or there are contingent remainders. And so we need to move on to step 2. Okay. So step 2 is easy to talk about, and it's not such a difficult step. It's step 3 where all the bad stuff happens. What we're doing with step 2 is identifying potential validating lives. And so that's a new word, validating lives. So what are we looking for with validating lives? What we're looking for is one life, one person who is alive at the time of conveyance, who can, for us, validate the conveyance so that it doesn't violate the rule against perpetuities. Okay. There's really no requirement. There's no way. So like in theory, potential validating lives includes anyone on the Earth, or I guess on the space station, who is alive at the time of the conveyance. Okay, so anyone can be the validating life. However, there really are only so many people that realistically can be validating lives. And almost always what you're looking for is someone who either is in the conveyance or can affect the condition that is leaving the future interest uncertain. Okay, so in this example, we would probably identify the individuals that are listed here as potential validating lives, because who are the people on Earth most likely to be able to affect whether or not someone is A's first child to reach the age of 25? Well, A might be, okay, but also A's currently alive children, W, X, Y, and Z, they also will have something to say about who is A's first child to reach the age of 25. Okay. So in this example, our potential validating lives are A, W, X, Y, and Z. Okay. I could be a validating life for this in theory, but I have no connection to the contingent remainder here. There's nothing about my life, as wonderful as my life is, it just doesn't have any bearing on who A's first child to reach the age of 25 is. Okay. And so that's why I, though theoretically could be the validating life, am not going to be. Okay. So really what we're looking for are people who can be the individuals who affect that condition. Because remember, what's the problem that we're trying to resolve is the uncertainty of that future interest. Okay. So I'm going to say here that A, W, X, Y, and Z are potential validating lives. That's all we're doing at step 2. Step 3. Now, this can get morbid. and confusing. But what we're trying to accomplish in step 3, this is the sort of the major work of the rule against perpetuities, is to determine, of the application of the rule against perpetuities, is to determine if any of those potential validating lives actually can validate the conveyance for us. Okay? Determine if any of the lives validate this conveyance. Okay? And so what does that mean to validate the conveyance? And here is the rule. For a conveyance to be validated, the uncertain future interest must be resolved within 21 years after the death of a validating life. Okay? For a conveyance to be okay, the uncertain future interest, here the contingent remainders, must be resolved within 21 years after the death of a validating life. And so what we're doing in step 3 is figuring out if any of these lives we can say as a matter of logic that it absolutely, positively cannot be anything but be resolved within 21 years after the death of a validating life. Okay, so we are trying to figure that out. We are not looking at what actually happens after this. We are not looking at what is likely to happen after this. This is a rule of possibility, not a rule of probability. All we're looking for is, can we, for any of these potential validating lives right here, say we know for certain that within 21 years after that person's death, this contingent remainder will be resolved. Okay? I should have put back here that there's a hidden reversion in here as well. Okay? It's not going to end up mattering for our purposes, but it is there. Okay. David, you got a hand up.
Yes, it's on the step 3. Sorry, my computer, I hit something that's pulling up on my computer. Okay. You said the uncertain future interest must be resolved within 25 years after the death of a validating life. Is it just any of the potential validating lives, or does it have to be all of them?
If you find one validator, you move on. All you need is one.
Okay,
It doesn't have to be all of them.
So if just Z dies, unfortunately, then the clock starts ticking for A, W, X, and Y for the 21 years.
So let's do it. Okay. So we're gonna do this. So you want to kill Z first.
Sure.
Okay. So we're gonna begin with Z as a validating life. All right. So the question that we're going to ask is, in other words, so I've put, will we know for certain who the first child of A to reach the age of 25 is? And I've put that as being applied here. The more general way of framing that question would be 21 years after Z dies, will the contingent remainder be resolved? Okay. Will the contingent remainder be resolved? I've made it specific to this conveyance, but the general question you're asking as you're doing step 3 is 21 years after insert person dies, will the, in this example, contingent remainder be resolved? It might also be, will the executory interest be resolved? Okay. Will we know, will it be resolved? Okay. So David, what's your first instinct? Will we know within 21 years after Z dies who the first child of A to reach the age of 25 is?
Assuming none of the other children die or any of them, then yes, we would.
Okay. But you started that sentence with assuming. And so what does assuming,
That takes away the certainty.
okay, so you assume that they would, that none of these other individuals die. And we're all hoping that that's what happens, okay? Because we're not wishing WX and Y any ill, okay? But when we're determining if any of the lives validate the conveyance, we actually do have to wish them ill, okay? So if I can come up with a situation in which it's uncertain, then Z fails as a validating life. So David, can we come up with a situation in which it is uncertain, 21 years after Z dies, who the first child of A to reach the age of 25 is?
Yes. So Z would not be a validating life.
So how could that be? How might it be uncertain?
They could, I don't know, all the family gets sick or something. All sorts of horrible family destroying catastrophes could happen. We don't know.
Okay, so let's be more specific. WX, so Z is dead, right?
Mhm.
Because that's who we're starting with. And WX and Y also die. Okay, but A is still alive. And then what happens? What could happen?
A could die, or A could have another child, or
Let's give A another child. Okay, so within 21 years after Z dies, WX and Y die, then A has another child. Okay. When the clock starts ticking, by the time 21 years have passed, are we going to know if that new child is 25?
likely not.
I think it's more than likely not. How could they go? Well, assuming that the child is born at the age of 0
Mhm.
and not adopted at the age of 10. Okay, so let's assume that the child is born after this time. Will they reach 25 within 21 years?
No.
No, not unless they do some sort of space travel or something like that, that is going to accelerate their aging process. They can't be 25 in 21 years after Z's death. And so Z fails. So I'm going to pause. Now, David, let me ask you this. How likely is all that?
Incredibly unlikely.
Highly, highly, highly unlikely. Does that matter that it's unlikely?
No.
Not for the rule against perpetuity's purposes. Okay. Z fails as a validating life because we can come up with a ridiculous chain of events in which it will still be uncertain. Okay, because it will still be at that time, 21 years after Z has died, we won't know who A's first child to reach the age of 25 is. We just won't. Okay. Yale, I see your hand up.
Yeah, so if going off these same facts, let's say A has a child, T. Would T then become another potential validating life under step 2?
Nope. Why not?
Because it's not at the time of conveyance?
Because they were not alive at the time of conveyance.
Okay.
So after-born children cannot be validating lives. And by after-born, I mean born after the conveyance. Good question. So David, let me ask you this. We're gonna make it easy.
All right.
If Z can't be the validating life, can WX or Y?
I don't think so.
Same problems. All of the same story that we just told could apply to any of these children.
So would A be the only validating life here?
Okay, so WX, Y, and Z are out. Could A be a validating life? Okay, before we turn to can A be a validating life, are there other questions on why Z cannot? So Z fails. And so do all the other kids. Any others? We're good?
So Professor, for the validating life, the principle is that if there's any possibility to where the conveyance doesn't happen, then it fails, no matter how unlikely.
It's not so much that it doesn't happen. The word I'd like you to use is it's unresolved.
It's unresolved. Sorry.
Because if, well, yeah, I'm just going to leave it like that. I think that's a better way to think about it, because we'll use another example and see why that language matters. It's not that it has to go to someone, that someone has to be A's first child to reach a certain age. It's that we have to just know that it's going to be resolved one way or the other. Okay, it doesn't matter who it is, or it might even revert back to the grantor. All that matters is that it's no longer unresolved. It's no longer open or uncertain or something like that. Okay, and so to answer the phrasing of your question, if there's any possibility that it's unresolved, the person doesn't qualify as a validating life. And so then you can move on to the next potential validating life. So we started with the kids, and we started with Z. And David walked us through sad turn of events in which we actually will have an unresolved future interest still 21 years after Z's death. And so therefore Z failed. And we could have gone through the same process for W, X, and Y, but I'm going to save y'all from it. The same reason, for the very same reasons, W, X, Y, and Z we've already done, fail as validating lives also. Because there is some possibility, however remote, that this will be unresolved still after any of their deaths. And of course, it always involves killing all of them. Okay, killing all of them plus having an afterborn child.
So then would A also fail as a potential validating life?
All right, so let's do A as a validating life.
Because what if A dies?
Hold on.
Sorry.
I'm going to let you do it, but I want to just make sure we're all with it. What about A? So this is the process. So you'll start with Z and you'll say, oh, nope, that doesn't work. And you'll move on. And then you'll say, yep, I can see now for the same reasons that W, X, and Y are not going to work either. So what about A? Because A is different. Because A is not the same type of situation with regard to the contingent remainder as the kids are. So let's say we're going to have to ask the question now, is A a validating life? So the question is, 21 years after A dies, will we know for certain who the first child of A to reach the age of 25 is? So Jaski, you think, I think I hear you tilting towards no, we won't, or we might
Right.
not. Why not?
Well, because let's say A dies at the ages that the kids are now. So at the earliest, it would be 10 years until W could get it because they're the oldest. But within those 10 years, W could die.
Mm-hmm.
It would be 13 years at least until X could get it. They could die in 13 years, and so on and so forth. So possibly, we wouldn't know. There's so many scenarios where we wouldn't know because there's 10 years at least till the first kid could possibly get it.
Right. Though 10 years is within 21 years, so that would be okay.
Right, but it's not certain.
Okay. But is it certain that we can say someone is going to get it within 21 years after A dies?
No,
Why?
because all the kids could die.
Okay. So then is it certain that no one will get it?
No,
Why?
because all the kids could stay alive.
Okay. But let's say they all die. Okay.
All right.
Is it possible that it will be unresolved? That there still might be 21 years after A dies, someone out there who could be 25, be the first child to reach 25, but hasn't gotten there yet.
The first, no, if W, X, Y, and Z all die,
Mm-hmm.
then no, there would be no other child that could reach the age of 25, especially if A is dead.
Okay, but what might have happened before A died?
They could have had another child.
Mm-hmm. And how old might that child be when A dies?
Old enough to reach the age of 25 before
Could
20.
be old enough, but they also might be too young, right? If they're under 4, then we've got a problem. So let's play that out, okay? So let's say that what happens here is A dies in 2020, okay? So the question we're asking is in 2041, will the contingent remainder be resolved? Or asked another way, will we know for certain who the first child of A to reach 25 is? Or will we know for certain that A will not have a child reach age 25? Okay. Will the contingent remainder be resolved? That means one way or the other. It doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be someone that takes it. It could be that we just know for sure that no one will take it. Okay. And so, Jasky, you're telling me that it's possible that we will know. Okay. And that's great. But that's not good enough to validate the conveyance. What we need to know is if it's certain that we will know one way or the other what happens to this conveyance, whether it is resolved or not, this contingent remainder. And so you said, let's go ahead and just kill these guys because we know that's going to have to happen. Okay, so they're out. And so 2041 comes around. What might have happened in between the time of conveyance, and 2041? You said something earlier about another child.
Yeah, another child could have been born.
Mm-hmm.
Well, between 2019 and 2020, I guess.
Yeah, so let's say, let's just, right, so. Right, so conveyance 19 is like, I mean, conveyance in 2018 is like, that's the time we're looking at. What was possible in 2018 at the moment of conveyance, not what actually happened. And so everything else, this is all fiction. That's all fiction. We're making that up. We don't know that any of that is going to happen. It doesn't matter whether it actually happens. All that matters is it could happen. What could happen is that a new child is born in 2019, then A dies, then all these other people die, then 2041 comes around, and you wanted that child to be called T, right? Is that what you said? Someone used a T in here, huh?
Yeah, somebody else said that.
Okay, so new child T is born. So 2041 comes around. How old is T?
22.
So if the question is this question, will we know for certain who the first child of A to reach age 25 is? Or will we know for certain that A will not have a child reach the age of 25? Will that be resolved in
Yeah.
2041?
Yes.
Will it?
Well, I'm sorry. I keep getting mixed up between the conditionals and the objective. So we don't, right? We don't.
Why not?
Well, so wait, we're saying that all of the 4 kids die and T is the only one still left, right?
Sure.
Okay, then in that case, we know for certain no kid would get it.
Do we?
Yes.
We know at 2041 that no one has gotten there yet, but
Right.
might someone still get there?
Yes.
There still might be a first child of A to reach 25, right?
Right, but isn't it within the 25 years?
That's what I'm saying, right? So the point is that we don't know for sure the answer to the question at 21 years. At 24 in 2041, we don't know the answer to the question.
Okay.
Got
Yeah.
everybody getting that? So if you can't answer the question, yes, it will be resolved, then Jasky, you're skipping ahead to saying if it won't be resolved, then it's out, right? So if the answer to the question is no, it will not be resolved, then then A fails as a validating life. Okay. All right, is that making sense to people? A is going to fail also because A could have an afterborn child, a child born after the conveyance, who is still not yet 25, but could get to 25 21 years after A's death. So A is going to fail as a validating life also. Okay, so A fails also. And so if we cross off all our validating lives and we don't have any validating lives, then we get to step 4. Okay. Step 4, if the conveyance cannot be validated, you retroactively destroy the uncertain future interest. And so the conveyance that was to A for life, then to A's first child to reach the age of 25, becomes to A for life. The contingent remainders were invalid from the start because they were uncertain. Okay, and so that is the effect of the rule against perpetuities. It retroactively destroys uncertain future interests that cannot be validated. This was an example. These contingent remainders are an example of uncertain future interests that could not be validated. Therefore, the rule against perpetuities retroactively destroys them. The reason I say retroactively is because, unfortunately, this conversation is not going to happen in 2018. If it had happened in 2018, they would have drafted a conveyance that didn't violate the rule against perpetuities. It's going to happen some later time, most likely at the end of A's life, when they're trying to figure out who gets the remainder or who takes the property. Okay. And then someone, maybe in this instance, the grantor is going to say, wait a second, or the grantor's heirs is going to say, wait a second, this whole thing was invalid. And then we're going to retroactively destroy all of those contingent remainders, leaving this in place. And Tierney, let me ask you this, because you started us way back at the beginning. What interests does this create if this was the conveyance?
To A for life. That's a life estate.
Life estate plus
What you mean plus?
Well, life estate is just the present interest. And so there's got to be a future interest somewhere.
Oh, yeah, remainder.
Who's the remainder go to?
The remainder goes to a third party.
Right? So who's the third party here in 2A for life?
Is it O?
Yeah, but they're not a third party. So the grantor has what? Not a remainder,
Or reversion?
reversion. So when A dies, this would go back to the grantor's estate or the grantor's heirs or the grantor if they're still around. Okay. Let me change it. Okay. To A for life, then to A's first child to reach the age of 21. Step 1, identify the interests. I'm just going to skip over it and say it's the same. A has a life estate. W, X, Y, and Z have contingent remainders in fee simple. Okay. Just like before. Step 2, identify the potential validating lives. Again, same ones. The kids plus A are the potential validating lives here. Step 3, ask the question, is there any of those that will qualify as the validating life? Okay, and so I'm going to start with A here. In other words, okay, I'm going to tell you that the answer to that question is yes, it will be resolved. That this conveyance, to A for life, then to A's first child to reach the age of 21, is perfectly fine. And we don't have to destroy the contingent future interest. Whereas if it said 25, it's invalid. The contingent future interests are invalid. Or if we had said 22, it would be invalid, or 23, or whatever. Okay. So we've already gone through an example where we can identify some possibility where, however remote, where we won't know. It'll be still unresolved 21 years after A's death. That's what Jaski and I worked through. 21 years after A's death, it's uncertain. We still don't have it resolved. Who's the first to reach 25? But Jaski, I've already told you all the answer to this. Will we know for certain who the first child to reach 21 is within 21 years after A's death?
I mean, you said yes, so yes.
Yes, right? So I said yes, and so it is yes. So do you believe that?
So
I see a couple people shaking their head no, you don't believe me.
Actually, I do. So let's say A has a, wait. Yeah.
We're still going to have to kill all the kids. So go ahead and kill all the kids.
All right. So I got it. So W, X, Y, and Z, they're 6 feet deep.
Mm-hmm.
All right. But if T comes into the picture,
Mm-hmm.
let's say like a day before A dies, then that means that they would turn 21 the day before the 21 years would be up. So they would turn 21. They would be the first child to do it.
Correct. So everybody following that. So that's We're I think 90% there. No matter what, assuming what I've told y'all, I think I told y'all on Monday, A can't have kids after A's dead, right? I know that scientifically that is possible, but in our world, A cannot have kids after A is dead. Therefore, A has, if T is born, it's during A's life. And if it's during A's life, then 21 years later, we will know whether or not T made it to 21. So if they're going to get to 21, they're going to get there before the clock runs out, before that 2041 date hits, the 21st anniversary of A's death. Okay. So Hunter, I'm going to guess your question. Your question is, what if T dies in that 21-year period? Is that it?
No, actually, my question
Darn
was, regardless of like, if T does come along, T wouldn't be a validating life though, would he or she?
No, T is not a validating life.
So
A
then-
is the validating life.
Oh, okay, never mind. Backtrack.
Davis?
Yeah, so then what if T dies along the way?
Davis, what was your question before I ask my question using Hunter's voice?
So, you mentioned the child thing. No one can have a child after they die. I understand that would go for like scientific ways of what if like someone literally just like had sex and the child was born after they die? Like, does that still count as that's not their child in this situation?
I'm going to let you talk about that with your upper level professors and your friends. There are quirks in the law that take care of these kinds of situations. That's one example. Another would be, so in that example, the father would have impregnated someone and then die the next day, and then the child would be born 9 months later. And so they would have a child after they died. But frozen sperm, frozen eggs, there's all sorts of scientific ways in which it's actually not the case that you can't have children after you die. I don't want y'all to worry about it. If you want to have a conversation about it, we can do that offline. But there are little sort of details that say that account for these possibilities, at least for the one that you just described. The frozen eggs and frozen sperm, it becomes a little more complicated because that really you could have a child decades later in theory, right? Decades after your death, which really, really complicates this stuff. When the rule against perpetuities came into being, that was not really a problem. Now it has been complicated.
Thank you.
So Hunter, the question that Hunter didn't want to ask, but that I'm going to ask is, what happens if T has died in the 21-year interim? Okay, so T is born right before A dies. And Jaski has said correctly that if T is going to make it to 21, it's going to happen within 21 years of A's death. But Hunter asked sort of, what if T dies in that 21-year period? So the answer is in the way that this is phrased. Will the contingent remainder be resolved? And the answer is that the contingent remainder will be resolved because there is a fifth interest holder here. Okay. And so if T does die, and any other kids are also going to die before the 21 years is up, are we going to know the answer to the question, who the first child of A to reach 21 is, Hunter?
No, we wouldn't.
Are you sure?
If there's the possibility that they could all die before any of them
Right.
reach 21, so no.
So then what's the answer to the question?
Of will we know who the first child?
Yeah, what's the answer to the question, who is the first child of A to reach 21 if they've all passed?
None.
None. Well, and
So that would be
we will
the
know
answer.
that. Huh?
So yeah, we would know that then.
We do know. Okay, so it doesn't necessarily mean that someone has to get there. It means it has to be resolved. Okay, and so It might be T, it might be no one, it might be W, it might be X, it might be Y, it might be Z. It doesn't really matter who it is. We don't need to know the answer to the question. We need to know that we will know the answer to the question. Okay? So within 21 years after A's death, will we know who the first child of A is? No. But will we know the answer to the question?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, and so that's what I mean by it will have been resolved at that point, in whatever way it's resolved. As a matter of logic, there is no way, unless you account for the scientific birth of a child after your death, there is no way in which this will remain uncertain 21 years after A's death. Therefore, A is a validating life. Therefore, the conveyance is valid from the beginning. Therefore, we can all say, wait, well done, lawyer, for drafting this in a way that doesn't violate the rule against perpetuities. How we feel about it?
Very confused, because I don't understand how that differs from the first scenario that we were given.
Well, the number one way in which it differs is the date. 25 versus 21, right? And so you're saying it sounds kind of arbitrary. Like, why would a first to reach age 21 be okay, but first to reach age 25 not be? And I'm kind of with you on that, except that the rule applies to 21 years after the life in being. Okay? We are out of time on this, so I'm going to let you guys go. I know y'all have another class. I'll stick around for a few minutes, and on Monday, we will talk briefly about the reforms to the rule against perpetuities, but then we will all move on with our lives after that. Okay?
Okay, so could you repeat when you said T is not a validating life, T is a what in that last scenario?
T is just a person. I don't know. The validating life is A, the parent.
Mhm. Because I know Hunter said he asked how was T the validated life if T was born after the conveyance, and he said T.
Mhm.
I didn't hear the second part, but maybe you said.
I think what I said is T is not the validating life. A is the validating life.
Okay.
I didn't say what T was, because T isn't anything. They're just a character in the story.
Okay.
Hey, Professor.
Yes.
So this is the procedure that I've got down. Tell me if I've got this right. So that we're asking first if any of the currently living in line to vest, do we know if 21 years after the conveyance they'll be old enough? That's the first question, applied to the currently living.
Okay.
And then after that, we add an afterborn child and apply the same question. If 21 years post-conveyance, they'll be old enough, and do we know if they'll be old enough? And yes, it's valid. No, it's invalid. Is that the procedure?
Sort of, except that you're really the second part. So the afterborn life cannot be a validating life. So they can, where they play into it is that they might be the taker of the contingent remainder in this example, for just for sticking with it for this purpose. They might take it, they might take that contingent remainder, but they cannot be the validating life. So the first thing you said, I think, works, right? You go for the living people and say, will we know within 21 years after their death whether or not they take, right? And in most instances, the answer is no. If the afterborn child is usually just a fiction in the story. So the T character is really usually just a fiction in the story. They cannot themselves be the validating life. So the procedure would be really going through that same process with anyone who can affect that contingency. So If we're talking about A's kids, so this is, you know, we started with Z as our validating life, and we saw that it didn't work, and that none of the kids would work. But A is actually the better place to start, because A has a much better impact on A's children than actually any of A's children have, because all of A's children could pass away, but A could still have more children. Is that making sense? So I would always start with, I would always look at whatever the contingency is and start as a potential validating life with the person that has the most direct impact on it.
Which is A.
Which is A in this
Right.
example.
Yeah.
Let me put this up real quick, because this is worth putting. What if it had said, okay, so instead of A's first child to reach some age, it actually identifies the person, and it says this person, B, if they reach 50, 100, whatever, okay, who is a better validating life to choose in this example?
B.
Say it again.
B.
B, right? Because we're going to ask the question, within 21 years after B's death, will the contingent remainder be resolved? In other words, will we know whether or not B has reached the age of 50 within 21 years of B's death? Will we?
Yes.
Of course, right? B will either have been 50 when they die, or they won't have been 50. And if
Yeah.
they haven't gotten to 50, we don't need to wait the 21 years to figure out if they're going to be 50. We know they're not.
Yeah, I get you on that part. I'm with you there. Where I'm getting a little tripped up is the picking of the person, the picking of the step before that.
Mhm.
I mean, in this example, you've made it clear with B, but like, oh, I don't know. Is it, or is it always going to be? I don't know. Are we getting that from the question, or like what information are we getting from the question, and what are we like hypothesizing, imagining? You know, like.
When you say the question, which
Well,
question
like
are
you've
you?
given me B here. You've given me B, and you said by age of 50, right?
Right. So
I
what
guess I'm asking,
you
is the
should be
question
looking
always
for?
gonna contain something like that? Is it gonna give me that type of information, or?
So when you're in step 2, where your focus should be is on looking at the contingent remainder. Okay. And looking at, okay, who is the person in the universe that most has the impact on whether or not that contingency occurs. Okay. So if B reaches the age of 50, B is the person. But if we're broadening it out and we can't point to a single person, and we're saying A's first child, well, A controls their children. It's so hard to articulate. A controls A's children. That's like the first step in becoming A's first child to reach the age of 21, is that A controls how many children they have. Whereas B is our determining character in this particular contingency. If it said to A for life, then to B if Charles reaches the age of 50, the contingency is if Charles reaches the age of 50. And so who would likely be our validating life there?
Me.
Charles. Okay. So if it says if Charles smokes a cigar, will we know within 21 years of the end of Charles's life whether or not he has smoked a cigar?
Yeah.
So Charles, again, is going to be our validating life, even though you have no interest in this property whatsoever.
Uh-huh. Okay. All right. I got to go to contracts, but I'm probably going to come to office hours. Thanks.
Okay. All righty.